Alright, everybody, for today's critical thought, we'll return to the topic of difficulty and what it means towards accessibility and balance. It seems like every time a new challenging game is released, this debate seems to rear its head. It's happened before with Dark Souls, and it's happening right now with Cuphead. My Twitter developer feed seemed to explode over the last few days with people arguing and debating about Cuphead and whether or not it needs an actual easy mode or ways of actually skipping boss fights and stuff like that. There's an article on Rock Paper Shotgun and Polygon about it as well. But whenever we have these discussions, it always seems to lead back into accessibility. Namely, if you make the game easier, more people are going to play it. If more people play, it means more people will buy it, and so on and so forth. But whenever we have these discussions, there's always people who will immediately run to the argument that it's just people wanting to flex their e-peen, and It's supposed to be it being exclusive, so only the top players are supposed to experience a game, and so on and so forth. And I find that argument a little bit flawed. As we've talked about, difficulty design in a video game is very tricky to do properly, and it takes a very fine hand to balance a game meant for multiple skill groups, even if you're just going to focus on one. And when it comes to designing a game, it's up to the developer to ultimately decide what audience they're aiming for, be it something casual or something on the challenging side. And from there, the game has to be adjusted and fine-tuned accordingly. And when it came to Cuphead, my review went up yesterday. By the time you're watching this on YouTube, I found the game to be too easy in some aspects. I felt that it was aimed in terms of affordances towards casual players without actually properly training people to get better. And that's one of the major parts about difficulty and why a lot of people enjoy challenging games. By the fact that you are supposed to train to play them. It's not just a matter of you loading up Dark Souls one day and beating the entire game in an hour. I was talking about this on our Dark Souls 3 chat, but every time I go away from Dark Souls for an extended period of time, I basically have to start right back at zero almost, relearning the design, the patterns, and so on. And that has always been a major popularity behind challenging games. The fact that the game doesn't hold your hand, and that there are walls and mountains for you to overcome. And the Polygon article got a little bit weird when it came to talking about this, saying that they felt that this is basically them excluding people from playing the video game. And I don't necessarily agree with that. When it comes to games like Cuphead, Dark Souls, Devil May Cry, and so on, these games were designed around an explicit audience. With the Souls series, for instance, you know that From Software meticulously placed every enemy, blade of grass, shortcut, boss, equipment piece, you name it. And everything was explicitly designed to be on the higher end of the scale. And a common defense of Dark Souls that people will say is, if they would have made an easy mode, it wouldn't have been Dark Souls anymore. And that is a fair assessment. Anyone who has looked at good difficulty design in video games knows that it's not just a simple matter of either giving the player 50 more points of health or giving the enemy 50 more points of health if you're trying to make things hard. Good difficulty balance requires a proper understanding of what makes your game easier or harder and then tuning things accordingly. And as I've said before, I am not a big fan of difficulty settings in games because more often than not, they will lead to an imbalanced design, whether making the game so easy that you don't really need to play the game in order to see it, or you're making it so hard that it's not really a challenge, it's just torture to play. Like I've said before, you can make an enemy do like 10 million points of damage and kill you in one hit, but that's not really a fair challenge. And this is why, like I said a few minutes ago, a lot of people turn to the Souls series as a shining example of good difficulty design, by the fact that there are no difficulty settings. Like we just talked about, everything in Dark Souls is there for a reason. The game was fine-tuned explicitly around a certain level of play. And if you've listened to previous critical thoughts, you know that we've talked about the baseline experience. That is the bare minimum bar that the player needs to reach in order to beat a game. Now, depending upon the game and the design, this can vary. In an RPG, the bar could be get to level 70 or have level 70 gear. In an action game, it could be understand how to dodge, double jump, and so on. But the point is, the game expects the player to reach a certain level of mastery. Even with games aimed at younger audiences, still expect something. Obviously, the bar is far lower in a casual game than it is in a Dark Souls kind of title, but it's still sound. And some of the best games have managed to provide challenges for multiple skill levels while still providing the means or the reason to grow. In an article I wrote a few years ago, I talked about how Dark Souls and Super Mario Galaxy have the same kind of difficulty design. Both games give you access to all elements of its design from the get-go, and then challenges you with a progressively growing skill curve. The difference, of course, is that the bar for Super Mario Galaxy starts far lower than the bar for Dark Souls. But both games basically train the player to grow. And the faster you understand the intricacies and complexities, the easier the game becomes. And this is why I said in my Cuphead review, that while the bar for Cuphead is on the higher side compared to other games, once you cross it, there's not much else in terms of challenge. In Dark Souls, they hit you with that bar from the get-go and then things grow from there. But the difficulty smooths out over time by the fact that, again, it's based on your understanding. If you figure out how to properly dodge and parry attacks, there's not much in Dark Souls that's going to cause you trouble. The same goes for Mario Galaxy. If you can master a running spin jump into a wall jump followed by another spin, you're going to find a lot of hidden stuff fast. But the game isn't actively punishing you or forcing you to learn that until the time is right. Now, getting back to the topic at hand when it comes to having the quote-unquote easy mode or auto skip mode, whatever you want to call it, I've said this before, but I'm not a fan of this. And one of the big reasons has to do with how someone learns a game. As we've said before, one of the basics of game design is that things are supposed to progressively grow. You learn how to do A, that's going to help you with B, and C, and D, and so on. But if you skip challenges that are meant to teach you how the game works, you're effectively going to handicap yourself with learning things further, and you'll be more inclined to skip in the future to the point where you're just not going to play the game. If I skip learning B, chances are I'm going to skip C, D, and so on. Now, critics of this will arguably say that it's up to the player to define the experience. If someone wants to skip an entire game, why not let them? And this is where we get into one of the more trickier parts of this debate. And like I said at the start, difficulty and accessibility tend to be put together. And we've talked about accessibility before, and you can have accessibility options as small as having a colorblind mode, subtitles on the screen, workarounds for people with arthritis, or you could have things as heavy as the story mode, where there are no boss fights, auto skips, and so on and so forth. And for this kind of talk, I want to leave accessibility out in this case, and I'll explain why in a minute. Now, another recent example that people are trying to use which doesn't work is with the latest or the upcoming Assassin's Creed game that is going to have a discovery mode. Or it's either a discovery or a museum mode or something like that, where basically you can explore the area learning about Egypt and the history and mythology without any need to play the game. This is not an example of an easy mode, because this is being explicitly designed around the educational slant. If we were trying to infer this or create a version of this for Cuphead, it'll basically be just like watching like an anime flip book of all the enemies and bosses, which will still be pretty awesome. But it's not the same as willingly gutting or lowering the difficulty of your game. And like we said before, when it comes to doing this, this takes a lot of work when it comes to balance. Some people will say it's as easy as just tweaking values. But like I said in the previous example, if you tweak things wrong, you're going to end up with a situation where someone will play your game and not really play it or to learn it. And at the end of the day, in my opinion, a video game is meant to be played. And not every video game is going to be beatable by everybody. For instance, when I played Space Chem, I am not going to beat that game. I have made peace with the fact that I will never see the ending of Space Chem unless I actually YouTube it. And that's a point, or that's the point, that Zach, when he designed that, he made explicitly around that. And this takes me back to the point at hand about should the consumer be free to essentially play the game however they want. And this next part I think may be a little controversial, but we'll see. And I'm not the one to come up with this. I'm pretty sure I read this following part in a game design book a few years ago. But to me, a video game is like a vocal contract between the developer and the consumer. The developer agrees that they're going to create a situation with unique rules, environment, and design that the player must go through, and they promise that it is balanced justly and that the experience can be accomplished. As in, you're not going to create a game that literally can't be beaten. On the consumer side, they agree to the unique set of rules and circumstance. It's why it's very weird when people complain, why does my character take a shot to the head and he doesn't die? Or I can pick up healing potions and cure my arm getting cut off. The point is, the consumer agrees that they are playing a unique experience, and they must follow those rules accordingly. And leading this or taking this into the discussion of difficulty, at the end of the day, whatever the designer says goes. If the designer wants to make a tough as nails action game, then it's not within your purview to complain about that. Likewise, if I agree that, or if you promise me that your game is going to be on the casual side, and it turns out to be super frustrating, then the developer has failed on their side. But we were having this discussion on the Game Wisdom Discord channel, and one of my friends made a really good point. With a game like Cuphead, it has been built from day one to be tough as nails. And it's one of those cases where, for people who complain that the game's too hard, it's like, what were you expecting in this case? This would be like someone complaining that there's no ballet during the Super Bowl. At some point, you have to be exclusive. And no matter how well you design your game, you will always alienate someone. The dream of the 100% accessible game, I think, is kind of bull. Because at the end of the day, there will always be someone who will find your game ridiculously easy and they have perfected 100% the entire game in 20 minutes. And then you'll have someone who couldn't even get past the first level. And at the end of the day, as a designer, it's your job to create the experience that you want. Be it something hardcore, casual, or somewhere in between. Now, considering my audience and my regulars here watching this, I have a feeling I know what the answer is going to be to this, but to wrap up today's critical thought, the questions for everyone are as follows. So, the first one is, what do you think about difficulty levels? Are you a fan of them, or do you prefer games that keep things one experience, be it easy, hard, or somewhere in between? The next question for developers watching, the same thing. What is your opinion when it comes to difficulty sliders or difficulty levels? And if you are a fan of them, what kind of elements do you feel should be adjusted? Is it something as simple as tweaking values? Or should the game actually change to accommodate? Again, one of my favorite examples of changing how things work would be something like The World Ends With You that literally rewards you and changes how you upgrade your character based on that, depending upon how hard you make the game. Or recently with playing Asura, and how on the higher difficulties the map changes, more enemies are thrown in, and the rules become a little bit more strict in terms of what you can and can't do. But the values never change. It's very similar to Cuphead, While the bosses do have more health on expert difficulty, the real reason why they become a lot harder is that the patterns are faster and they're more inclined to alter patterns in subtle ways. But with that said, we're going to wrap things up here. So thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you're new, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you have a suggestion for a future topic. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you all next time with more discussions on design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. For my writings as well as weekly podcasts, check out game-wisdom.com. For ways of supporting Game Wisdom and get access to rewards such as VIP status, as well as voting for the Saturday Night Grab Bag, check out patreon.com/gwbycer. You can follow me on Twitter at gwbycer for my daily thoughts as well as updates as to what's going on. So thanks again for watching, and be sure to check out our next video coming real soon to the channel.